Hello and welcome you crazy people, my name is Jay and in this video I'm going to go through 7 thoughts that I had after playing my first game of Age of Sigmar. Now I did play this on Tabletop Simulator, which does actually skew I think some of these points a little bit, but I'll try and keep that in mind. Obviously I have played one game, so I'm not exactly going to be like pristine here. I may get things wrong and I might not understand everything, so with that caveat, please proceed with caution. So I have made some notes and we'll look at that right now. But first, the first point is actually something I can show you, which basically I quite like the simplicity of the game rules. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like, let's have a look on the screen here. Let's say there's 5 models in this unit and they're attacking another version of this unit, which are also 5 models. Well, you would, let's say they're all just using these hand weapons, you get 2 attacks, so if in a unit of 5 I would get 10 attacks. It would be 3 plus to hit, 4 plus to wound, and then the save would be 4 plus. Now, that's simple, and I quite like that. It was in like 40k, you still have to compare strength and toughness, and you've got weapon skills and ballistic skills, you've got chart, although I think they've actually started the weapon skill, I think that actually just is a 2-hit, but the strength and the toughness is still there. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, that's gone. A lot of the rules have been, well, they've been simplified, and I think ultimately for the best. So that would be like anything, by the way, the save is anything above you save, anything less you take a wound, 2 wounds each. The rules are very simple in that sense. Rend is like a minus to your save. I really, really enjoy the simplicity of the rules. But it's deceptively simple, I think, and I'll come back onto that in a bit. Yeah, like, it's pretty easy to just pick up and go with it. It's one of the more simple versions of, like, Warhammer that I've played. Warhammer Warcry is probably even more simple, because I think they ditch one of the roles, but then you end up taking more wounds, and it all gets a little bit more complicated like that. But whilst the rules are pretty simple, like, getting the rules can be a little bit more complex. So to really play the game at like an event or with people who are playing match play, you're going to need a minimum of 3 books. You need the rule book, you need your faction book, and you pretty much need the general's handbook for that year, which gets updated every year. So that's a minimum of 3 books to play, and it can actually be a little bit more than that depending on the faction. So I think I was looking at the Slaves to Darkness faction. Now I believe, and I could be incorrect here, that there's maybe rules for the Slaves to Darkness faction that you can use in the Marathi book and that kind of thing. So whilst it's 3 books minimum, it can quickly get higher than that. Plus there's a thing called allies, which I think it's like if you're in your realm of destruction, you can take allies in that. I'm not sure the points or how it works or whatever, but you would obviously need the book for whatever your allies you've picked. So I think it can 3 books is already quite a lot if you ask me, but then it can sort of just like go up, not exponentially, but it can go up to maybe 4, maybe even 5, which I do find the number of books to be a little bit unnecessary, especially coming from like a game like Star Wars Legion. I find that like it's awkward because there literally is no books. You have your rule book, which is free, and then your rules are basically on your cards. Granted, they have done erratas and stuff like that. My personal history is I used to play fantasy with my friends casually, then I sort of took a massive break, played Star Wars Legion, I'll say competitively, but badly. A bad competitive player, or at least a medium competitive player at best. So coming into Age of Sigmar, where you need like these rule books, I just find it a little bit awkward. It's not the end of the world, but like, let's say you were trying to get into the game, you need a minimum, you're going to need those, you need a minimum of 2 books, which is 40 quid, and then if you want to play like competitively, you need the general's handbook, which another 20 quid or whatever. So you're looking at like 60 quid for 3 books before you even start. I find that awkward personally. It's not, I just think it's a bad system. I probably never think it's not a bad system, but it is what it is. And it sort of leads me to, even though I understand it's a very minor thing, even though I understand it's probably needed so that GW can change things with the general's handbook, I don't like the fact that the war scrolls don't really show the points. Now the points are in the book, I believe. I think. I didn't even check because I used a list builder. But the points are available. They may not even be in the book. Might be in the General's Handbook. I'm not 100% sure. I literally didn't check, which is embarrassing. I just used a list builder. But the points are next to the war scrolls. And I would like them to be there, even though they get maybe superseded, just so that I have an indication that maybe my hard boys are not as good as my Gorg Hunters because of cost. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just would like that sort of simple indication for somebody who's new to the game to just show me like an expected power, because there's no like, I think 40k had like a power level, whereas this game doesn't have that. Therefore, you're just relying on points. So, but the points aren't easily seen. Now, it is sort of made up for by, they have a really decent list builder on the website. And I believe, and I haven't really used it too much, that the app is also quite good. So they're made up for, and generally you're going to make your lists in list builders. That's not easy for me to say. So I understand it. I just wish that they would show the points. Now, this is actually point 4, so we can call the points I just made points 1 to 3. One thing is, I think the movement is awkward, but I also think it's super important and probably pivotal to the game. So yeah, playing on Tabletop Simulator probably made this a little bit worse, because on Tabletop Simulator, if you want to move somebody 3 inches, you've got to like ping it and then move them and then move the next guy 3 inches and so forth. Now, the way that the movement works is everything is basically moved per model, which is fine and realistic, I understand that, but it's a little bit different from games that I played in the past, like in fantasy. Apart from like skirmish units in fantasy, you're essentially moving a big block that like moves around, right? And it's relatively easy. And in Star Wars Legion, you move your commander goes somewhere, and then the rest of the unit just goes within a circle around them. But in Age of Sigmar, let's say you've got 20 guys and your movement is 4, then each model can only move 4 inches, which is fine. Don't get me wrong, it makes sense, but it can be a little bit awkward if you've got 20 guys and you need to make sure you're only moving a certain amount of distance. Then it gets even more awkward with pile-ins, and you're in combat if you're in 3 inches, but a lot of your melee weapons are going to be 1 inch, and stuff like that. So the movement is, to somebody coming in, it feels a little bit clumsy, but I see now that that's probably where a lot of the games like strategy and tactics really lie. It looks like a simple skirmish game, but blocking people off when you attack, where you do your pile-ins and stuff like that, really like ups not the difficulty, but the mastery level. I think the really good players will be really good at that, and the really bad players will be really bad at that. And yeah, so that's going to be interesting. I will never probably get my head around the idea. I'm starting to get my head around it. Of the phases. So like in one turn, a unit can move, shoot, charge, and then attack, which I do find interesting. Now, I don't really have this on my list, but I quite like, in a sense, the tactics involved around who you pick when you do combat. So the way that combat works is whoever's turn it is will pick one of their models to attack, well, one of their units to attack, but it doesn't resolve that entire fight. So in Warhammer Fantasy, you would say, I'm going to do these units together, and then they would fight, I would fight, whoever. You actually would depend on who went first, unless you're Hiles, and you always went first. But like, somebody would attack first, and then the other person would attack that unit, and then they, or maybe your opponent, I can't remember, would pick another combat. Whereas in this, like, it's a little bit more like in Star Wars Legion. In Star Wars Legion, you depended on tokens, but in this one, you would be like, I'm going to pick this unit, that unit would attack, and then my opponent or whatever, they don't have to pick that unit. If anything, it makes sense that they pick a different unit to attack so that they can whittle another unit down before they get attacked back. So I enjoy that little tactical element to it, and the pile-ins and stuff like that. So when you pick them, you can do a 3-inch pile-in, but it's per model. Yeah, it's decent. I just find the movement awkward, because let's say I have 20 ad boys, I'm trying to attack one unit. I've charged, but maybe the guys at the back didn't have the movement to like wrap around and get in the back. Well, if you don't get within range, you can't attack. If you're not within melee range of each individual model, then those models simply can't attack. Whereas in like Star Wars Legion, anything within, if your unit's in combat, you just get to attack. So I found it a little bit clunky and a little bit clumsy, but I understand that it's probably pivotal and like super important to the game. And I think if you can master that, then you master the game perhaps the most, if that makes sense. So that's just my thoughts on movement. Clumsy but super important. I think if you simplified it, you would reduce a lot of the skill involved. So I don't necessarily have a solution or a fix to that, but that's just my initial thought after my one game. So do keep that in mind. Little things, I quite like the fact that you can measure whenever. It just reduces conflict. Back in the fantasy days, it was like, I enjoyed maybe guessing distances and stuff like that, but if you ever watch any X-Wing, you know, people get a little bit salty if you try and measure in a just to try and gain an advantage so you can help your movement and stuff like that. So yeah, it just reduces conflict, so that's pretty decent. Model count. So to compare this directly to Star Wars Legion, I'm sure some of you have played Star Wars Legion knowing this channel. Basically, I was playing a 1,000 point game, which is basically half of a standard game. So think of it like 400 points in Legion. And I had probably the equivalent number of models that I would have in an entire Legion army, like over like 35, something like that. And that's interesting. I don't think it necessarily means anything, but it is interesting. It also leads to the fact that you get a lot of dice rolling. Even in fantasy, like, when you had a lot of dice, it was very rare. In this, it sort of feels a little bit more common. So like those Chaos Warriors I showed you, even 5 of them, you'd be rolling 10 dice, which is, I mean, it's a chunk of dice, but, you know, imagine you had 20 of them. Well, now you're rolling 40 dice. The numbers can very quickly go up. So there's a lot of models involved for some factions. Like the Iron Jaws that I was playing, sort of like the semi-elite, semi-horde. I don't really understand it, but it is what it is. But it seemed like my opponent had a very similar number. He might have had a little bit more, actually. So there's a high model count, which, to be fair, it's not super high. It's much like lower than back in the day of Warhammer Fantasy, but relatively high. And that does lead a little bit into cost as well. So the more models you have, the more it costs. I once did a bit of a comparison between Star Wars Legion and 40k, and I found that basically per model they were very similar, but 40k was more because there was just more models. Obviously they've tried to reduce that in the new edition, and that was pre that edition, but I can understand that being here. And the prices probably seem to vary like quite a lot. So I was looking at a Slaves to Darkness list, and I was looking at like best list just so I didn't buy like junk, and one of them had 3 units of Varangard, and they cost I think £60 each, so it was £180 for 3 units. I was like, that's expensive. And I think like the Blood Knights for are like the same kind of price. However, I don't know how much that faction would have been, maybe like £300-400, I'm sure. But I managed to pick up like an eBay Iron Jaws army for about 250-2,000 points. So really that's not that bad. I think it just depends on the faction, the models you take in the faction, and that kind of thing. So yeah, cost is big variance. I think it feels weird when you buy 5 models or whatever for like 3 models for £60, even though they're chunky big boys, don't get me wrong. It just like, it can feel a little bit weird. But you know, Games Workshop models are always pure quality, so that's that. So overall, I enjoyed the game. I thought the game was fine. I like the simplicity. I like the fact that it's more complex than it seems. So like the rules are simple. It's like one of those things, isn't it? Like easy to learn, difficult to master. I think that is definitely the case here. Relatively easy to learn. Yes, it's a bit awkward to learn all your abilities and stuff like that for your own faction, but the gameplay itself is relatively easy to learn, but difficult to master. Especially, I think that movement phase is probably going to be like pivotal. My personal plan is learn the basic game, learn my own faction, and then go to events and just play casually. I'm never going to be the best. Obviously, I will try and learn as I go. Obviously try and get better. That is, you know, my whole thing. But I will try and get better as I go, but I'm not expecting massive success. Yeah, I like the fact that I thought it was going to be like really simple, and that the strategy and tactics was going to be about knowing who you should kill first and what you should kill. But actually, it's that combined with being able to maneuver in ways that like mess up your opponent or get you an advantage. Like, you know, maybe you've got a chaff unit, maybe you really you can block off a really expensive unit with it, maybe so they can't do what they want to do that turn and stuff like that. So a lot of depth where I didn't expect depth, if that makes sense. I still wish that they didn't have 3 rule books for me to buy and stuff like that. I wish the game was relatively easy to get into and stuff like that, which, to be fair, some of the rules are free. You can get like the core rules for free and stuff like that, but really you're going to need to buy your 3 books, I think. So they're my first thoughts. I'll be playing more. I'll be painting up my Iron Jaws. I'll be doing some stuff. I'll probably paint up my Iron Jaws on my terrain channel, weirdly, because it's like a hobby thing. So go check out my terrain channel. That's doing really well right now. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.